How's it going, everybody? My name is Austin, and I'm with Apostles Attic, which is a Christ-centered clothing line. You can go ahead and check me out there. And I'm with my friend Ryan.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ryan, and I'm with AIIW.org. Thanks for joining us today.
All right. So I wanted to open up each episode with the gospel message. And essentially, the gospel is the good news. And the good news is that God stepped into his creation and paid for the sins of the world through the person of Jesus Christ. And if we have faith in him and faith in what he's done, we will go to paradise as he put it on the cross. And so those few bullet points are that Jesus is God, that he paid for the sins of the world through his sacrifice on the cross, and that his sacrifice on the cross was accepted through evidence of his resurrection 3 days later, and that's why we celebrate Easter. And so, if we have faith in that Jesus is God and he paid for our sins and he rose 3 days later, we have a promise from God that we will go to heaven and eternally exist with him in paradise. And so I urge everybody to put their faith in Jesus Christ, and yeah, and you have a promise from God that you will go to heaven. And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to kind of share with everybody.
Amen. Thanks for sharing that. I know that we talk about the Bible and talk about God in every episode, but we don't always say that directly. But I think that it's important that people know what the gospel message is, that Jesus Christ loves them, that He died for them, and wants to see them in heaven with Him forever, and that unfortunately, because of our sin, that can't happen. And that's just beautiful. You know, it's a beautiful thing that Jesus did for us. That God would sacrifice His Son as well, and that the Holy Spirit would come and convict us of our sins. Right? It's that's that's our faith. You know, the basics of
Amen.
it.
All right, and we also wanted to start off our episodes with segments and begin doing that on our podcast. And one of the things I thought was super interesting is there's this group called the Pacific Justice Institute, and they basically deal with and cover legal matters that have to do with our country and our faith and Christianity and different things of that nature. And so I wanted to go ahead and cover a story from Pacific Justice Institute.
Okay, so we're going to watch that right now.
Yeah, so let's go ahead on over
Let me
to
see.
that page, and that would
Okay,
be the PGI weighs in on Texas 10 Commandments bill. So I'm going
give
to go
me.
ahead and read here. Let me know when you're ready for me to read.
Oh, you're gonna read? Sorry.
So we're going to
Okay.
read that brief thing before the video, and then we'll go ahead and watch the video.
Okay. So let me pull that up. I thought we were watching it. Yeah, I thought we were just watching the video. So little, my fault there.
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
You can just keep it on
Media
us really quick.
in the news, or no? What was it? Was it
Press releases.
press releases? Thank you.
hmm And then PGI weighs in on Texas 10 Commandments bill.
There we go. Perfect. Okay.
All
Cool.
right.
That should be
So
up.
let me know when you're ready for me to
Yeah,
read.
we're ready.
All right. The state of Texas is considering a bill that would require public schools to display the Ten Commandments in every classroom. On April 5th, the president of Pacific Justice Institute, Brad Dacus, spoke in support of SB 1515 to the State Senate's Committee on Education. SB 1515 was sponsored by State Senator Phil King. It would require the state's public elementary and secondary schools to display the Ten Commandments in each classroom as part of America's history, tradition, and the origins of American law. These types of displays were once traditional and accepted as an expression of religious liberty. Organizations were permitted to distribute copies of the Ten Commandments to school groups. This practice was restricted in 1980 when the court applied what has become known as the Lemon Test. But the Supreme Court's decision in Kennedy versus Bremerton School District in 2022 marked a notable shift in and once again permitted government displays of religious content as long as it comports with America's history and tradition. And in speaking to the Texas Senate Committee on Education, Brad Dacus said, "The Ten Commandments and the posting of the Ten Commandments is an acknowledgement of our history and our heritage, not just generally, but of American law itself. You can trace the origins of American law from bankruptcy law to criminal law to tort law to family law back to the Ten Commandments and their history. He went on to say, our youth today need to understand our truth. They need to understand our nation and where we came. To prevent them from knowing our history leaves them handicapped in understanding where we should go and how we should get there. Following Mr. Dacus' testimony, SB 1515 was passed by the Texas Senate and is now pending the state's House for consideration. All right. And so one thing I wanted to comment about this, Ryan, was right now there's a lot of stuff from like I would say left-leaning policies. They're 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 trying to talk to kids and about I would say left policy and just like left political stuff like I'll just, say like sex, gender, different things of that
Hmm.
nature are being discussed to young students and it's it's weird because that to me is a worldview. If you don't believe in God, that's a worldview. If you believe in all these other things, that's a worldview, right? And you're presenting that to kids while simultaneously not wanting the other side of that to present their issues and their points to kids. So I find it nice to see religious stuff coming back into the schools. What is your take on that, Ryan?
So my take on this, number one, I don't believe that people should be sending their children to public schools. I think that they're a great public harm, and that they have done nothing but degrade the value of our education and degrade the value of the citizens that come out of that education. You know, we aren't told or taught how to do our taxes. We aren't told or taught how to manage our lives in public school. We're taught all this nonsense, most of which we don't know. And the whole purpose behind public education is so that the government has a chance to indoctrinate your children. The whole entire framework of K through 12 education is based around a bunch of theories that didn't pan out. So I don't believe kids should be in public schools at all. For the very reasons that you stated, I think that there is no way to have a viewpoint neutral education. There's always going to be something that somebody is going to be indoctrinating your children into. And parents should have 100% control over what that indoctrination is. If they want to do it at home around their kitchen table and they want to teach their own children, great. If you want to send somebody to go pay them at a mathnasium type institution and it's literally a storefront and your kid goes and learns math at a storefront, that's great too. I've worked in the homeschooling industry and gone to different places that are called learning centers and different places where churches open up their doors and allow third party vendors like myself to go in and teach as well. And so there's so many other opportunities to educate your children today that don't involve the public schools that I don't see any reason how it's even conscionable at this point to allow your children into those vile institutions.
Yeah, so you're kind of suggesting that parents as a whole should just educate their children at home.
Either at home, at their church, right? So homeschooling doesn't have to be like literally at my home. The woman's chained to the kitchen. She doesn't leave all day, and like that's not what homeschooling should be. In my opinion, homeschooling should be one of the days of the week the kid goes to work with dad and goes and finds out what it's like to be in an office, finds ways he or she can help out at the office, helping dad with paperwork or doing some menial task, right? It used to be that the way that you were educated was apprenticeship. So in the Bible, it said that Jesus was a carpenter. At no point do we ever see Jesus in a scene in the Bible actually doing carpentry. What we do know is that his father was a carpenter and actually did do a lot of carpentry, and that what happened was, by definition, the child would go to work for their dad as an apprentice and learn all of those skills as well. So Jesus wasn't a carpenter in his work life, after 30 years old, but he had those
He had
skills and
those
was called
skills.
a carpenter because his dad did. And so that's what education should be. Education should be from the family and furthering the knowledge that you've gained, right? So that's my opinion on education. Now, specifically with this bill, I think it's great. There is no reason why the government can't have religious symbols and iconography in the classroom or wherever the government wants to put it, because the First Amendment is not a bar on on religion being in the government. It's a bar on the government affecting an establishment of religion. And so,
The people throw around that term separation of church and
mhm,
state, and it's really protection for the church, not for the state. Like, and so
exactly.
it's really funny.
Yep. And so if the voters all decide that we want to put a Ten Commandment statue wherever we want to put a Ten Commandment statue that's public land, that should be completely okay. Now, that would also mean that if there's a county that decides to put up a statue to Buddha, I don't think that there's anything that the government can do to stop that. So, this is a double edged sword that Christians are playing with in a certain way, because we could come upon a society in 50 years where it's all Buddha statues and no Ten Commandments anymore.
Well, look, we kind of in that regard, the world's gonna be the world and do the world, right? So we're gonna have to be beacons of light and be the salt of the earth. And even if we're one, church in a sea of Buddhist temples, we're gonna have to. That's gonna have to be the framework that we play in. Because if you don't, then you're just inviting issues. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, of course. And as Christians, we can exist in any society. We don't have to dictate what the government is. Christianity started under a pagan society of, right? It didn't just start as the majority. And so, and by start in a pagan society, I'm talking about Rome,
Abraham.
obviously not
Oh,
not Judaism, though we could have a discussion on that. But so it's something that Christians need to be involved in the government, and we need to be putting forth our ideas, and we need to make sure that the good ideas in the Bible are the ones that win out over all the bad ideas that are found elsewhere.
Can
That's
I
yeah.
ask you what kind of ideas? So people aren't kind of like back against the wall about the idea of Christians being in the government, because they think immediately that we're just gonna like put a bunch of rules on everything, because that's what they think about it anyway. So like, okay, so you're a Christian, right? So
Hmm.
let's say today you become a senator. What kind of stuff would you want to do? Government. What would you want to see done in government from a Christian perspective?
It's gonna it's going to sound like I'm starting off by saying that you can't do something immediately, but it is such a heinous crime against humanity that the first thing that I would do if I had any amount of power at all is I'd have to fight against abortion. It's a complete and total it's completely unjust, right? It's murdering human beings. So
What
that's
would
one
that look
thing.
like? How would that
Y-
manifest itself?
if I was a senator, I'd be putting in bills every single day. That would, and I'd be going around and I'd be talking to all the pro life senators and being like, so why aren't you voting on my bill? And you go around and you shame people into doing things. You can shame people as a
Ah.
senator.
Okay,
I'd just
so
be very vocal about it.
let's say somebody's trying to I'm gonna throw you a bone here. Okay, so somebody's in your state and they're female. Abortion just got banned, right? And so
Hmm.
now they get pregnant. And so they're just trying to figure out what the state's prescription is for me not like the female not wanting the child, but abortion is outlawed. So you Christian senator that just banned abortion, what do you suggest for said pregnant female that does not want her child in your state?
Yeah, so she won't be able to kill it if it's up to me, but I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with a mother who's not capable of taking care of her child or doesn't want to take care of her child with putting it up for adoption. And the biggest misconception in this country is that there is an adoption problem for infants. So yes, there are tons of people that are in the foster care system, and I'm sure there are even a few infants, but the fact is that for the most part infants are adopted almost immediately. And so as long as you know that you don't want the child, you bring the child to term, you have the birth, and then you can give the child up for adoption, and it's almost guaranteed to go to a loving and caring family that wants to have the child to take care
I
of him or
imagine
her.
you could even vet the people, right?
Yep.
I
uh,
imagine you
uh,
could do
so
interviews and talk to people and
So I've actually experienced the lack of infants availability firsthand. So at my church, there was a family that went over to China and had to go find an infant in China to adopt because there's no infants in the United States to adopt. It's that impossible to adopt
They were
infants in
looking
the
for
United
like a
States.
1 month old.
Yeah, they were looking for, so unfortunately, the reasons why older children are in foster care make it hard for families to adopt them. And what I'm saying is that a lot of the children that are older than infants, the reason they're there is because their family wasn't capable of keeping them, and so there's a whole host of issues that those children might have. And so there's a lot of parents that are prejudiced against foster care children that are older than infants because they're going to have these problems and they're not going to be able to take care of them adequately, in their opinion. So I'm not agreeing with this and saying that that's not an issue. Of course, that's an issue, but that's not an issue that abortion doesn't solve the foster care problem. We still have children in foster care because the mother wanted the child at the time, and then through different family situations couldn't keep the child, couldn't take care of the child, was abusive to the child, all these horrible things. And so those are their own separate problem that abortion has nothing to do with.
Okay.
And so
All right.
that's, yeah, so basically there's no infants available to adopt in this country.
What I'm gathering from
Yeah.
what you're saying is there would be a line out the wazoo if you said, "Hey, I'm about to birth a child and it's not even born yet, and I'm not gonna want that." And so I imagine you could meet with people, literally go inside their house, see where their your child would grow up, and it's it. I think that's the world that we should live in, is
Mm-hmm.
a world where we're having our babies, and it's not like you should it's one of those things, because like if you just get I think if you if you can get over that hurdle of, okay, I'm somebody who believes in abortion and pro-choice, right? Not me personally, I'm just but
Mm-hmm.
let's say you
Yeah.
have to get over that hurdle, right? And it's like, okay, so I'm now a month too pregnant. If I believe if you can go and get an ultrasound and see your baby, and y just understand that it might look just like you, and it's so crazy. Like, oh man, like I personally look like a carbon copy of my dad, and I'm
Mm-hmm.
his youngest kid, right? So it's just really interesting, but
Yeah, well, and
it's
I find it funny, not funny. It's crazy that the first thing that Planned Parenthood got rid of in their procedures was ultrasounds. Like the last thing that Planned Parenthood ever wants you to have is an ultrasound, and it's because the second you see that child, because it's not like fetus doesn't mean clump of cells in Latin or
because you're
anything.
disconnected until you see it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. A lot of people are. I think I couldn't possibly understand what it is to be a woman, but I think a lot of women are just by definition connected to their child because it's the child is inside of them. But there's for those women who aren't, or for those women that could think of murdering their child, seeing it, seeing an actual picture of them, it definitely makes a big difference.
Yeah, I would 100% say if you saw an ultrasound, I think like 90% of people like opt out of their initial choice to have an abortion. So
It's
it's
a huge number of people that when they
yeah,
see it,
yeah.
they end up changing their mind, and it's because it becomes, like you said, it becomes real. It's your child. You can see the nose and the cheeks, and you start
The
thinking about it.
fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So, yep, I think that should
Sorry, we.
conclude our little our segment here. That was a lot of fun though.
Yeah, it was that was great. It kind of went took a left turn there with some of your questions, but I liked that, and yeah, that's how I feel about abortion. I think it's evil and wrong, and it's murdering a baby. Just to be completely clear.
Yeah, hot take. Short incoming.
Yep.
All right, so we're going to continue our story in Genesis, and we're going to pick up in the story or in chapter 37 of Genesis. And this is kind of starting the story of Joseph. And Joseph, I think he's born in chapter 31, but then nothing is said for like several chapters until we get to, chapter 37.
Hmm.
And so in chapter 37, Joseph is the favored son of Jacob, and Jacob has two dreams that foretell of his future greatness. And those dreams are kind of interesting. The first one is like he sees a bunch of bundles of grain, and he sees his brother's grain bowing down to his bundle of grain, and he tells them about it, and they get upset. And then he has another dream where it's like the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to him. And he revealed these dreams to his brothers, and even his even his parents would bow down to him, and his brothers became jealous, and they plotted against him. And eventually, they wanted to actually murder him, but I believe it was his brother Reuben, correct? That was like, no, 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 let's not kill him, but we'll throw him in a ditch, right? Was it
Mm-hmm.
Reuben? Okay, it
Yeah, I
was
believe
Reuben.
so.
All right, so it was Reuben. Good on Reuben, at least. Um, was he really pop quiz? Was he the same one that slept with his dad's concubine?
No, that was oh yeah, yeah. Yes, that was Ruben.
That
So
was Reuben.
I I think so.
I want to
I
say
I,
it was
I
Reuben.
don't quote me on that.
Okay, okay.
I
All right.
believe so, but I
Um.
apologize to any descendants of Ruben if that's not the case.
Anyway,
um.
so Reuben bails him out and says, no, instead of murdering him, let's just put him in this ditch. And they take this fancy robe that his father gave him, the robe of many colors, and they sold him to as a slave to a group of Ishmaelite traders, which is kind of a flashback to when Sarah offered Hagar to Abraham to have a child because they hadn't had a child yet, and they birthed Ishmael. Eventually, they sent him Ishmael and Hagar out of the camp, and so it looks like we have some descendants here, um, Ishmaelite traders who buy him for I think it was 20 pieces of silver, not even 30, and they take him to Egypt. And so basically, when Jacob hears about this, it says that Jacob tore his robe, and I,
Mm-hmm.
I was curious why did he do that, and does it have any kind of like significant meaning?
Yeah. So in in basically just ancient times in general, tearing your robe was a sign of grief or that something horrible had just happened to you. And basically, what we don't understand today as 21st century Americans is the value of clothing. So everything was harder to do in ancient in the ancient world, okay? So if you wanted to build a house, you had to go and you had to build that by hand with an axe, chopping down trees, right?
Processing that lumber
Mhm.
by hand.
By
Oof.
hand with, you're
Tools.
literally
Yeah.
shaving off with a blade, right? So everything's difficult. So if you want to make clothing, how do you make clothing? Well, they'd have to go shave a sheep. They'd have to then take that sheep's wool. They'd have to process it in some kind of a loom. I don't know exactly how that worked, in Abraham's time, right? So they had to process that into a garment, and then that garment would have to last them for years. You wouldn't get a new shirt every month. You couldn't go buy a 20 pack of white t-shirts at Walmart for 5
That's what
bucks,
I do.
right? And so when you tore your shirt, that was a sign of huge grief, and it was something that would stay with you. For most people, you're going to go and you're going to mend that shirt, you're going to mend that whatever it is that you were wearing, that coat, and you're going to see that scar on your clothing, and other people are going to see that scar on your clothing for years. This is something that I just kind of started thinking about. So I haven't read this anywhere, but like I said, the clothing was so valuable that you wouldn't have thrown it away, you would have repaired it. And so it's like just short of actually harming yourself, because number one, you're putting at risk your ability to stay warm. So that's a very very big risk, is freezing to death in these times during the winter. The weather makes a huge difference in your life, and so for all these reasons, it's a very big deal when someone's so grief stricken they rip their robes.
They just.
Yeah, what do you think would kind of be a modern equivalent, Austin? Um,
Okay, so if clothes were super important to them, like, and you didn't really buy one very often, I'd say maybe like a car, like a computer. I imagine just taking like a sledgehammer to like an F-150, just beating the windshield up and just, I'm so
yeah,
mad. Bah! Or
yep,
like, you find out that one of your loved ones is sick, and so you just like beat your computer up
yep.
with a hammer.
Or you
Dude,
get a you get a horrible message on your phone and you just chuck it. You're just that grief
Yeah.
stricken. Like you're so overcome with emotion that you're not thinking rationally, and so you do something that's going to jeopardize something, or be it's going to cost you something later. And so that's what so what you'll see in the Old Testament more so than the New Testament are examples of people in terrible situations that end up ripping their clothes or tearing their clothes. So that's kind of the context there. Um, just to kind of get back into the story a little bit. So we've talked a little bit about Abraham, Isaac, and now we're talking about the family of Jacob. And so Jacob has work. What he did. Did we go over what he did for his wives at all?
No, Leah and Rebecca, no. What
Yeah,
happened with that?
yeah. So Jacob goes and he has to work for his wives. He agrees with his father-in-law Laban, I believe, and
Laban?
he agrees to work for him for 7 years to get his daughter's hand in marriage. And so he wants the daughter Rachel. He's infatuated with her. Apparently, she's beautiful, or there's something about her that he just adores. So he works for 7 years, marries someone, and ultimately he was tricked, and it ends up being her sister, Leah. And so there's a whole complicated story. He ends up working another 7 years, gets Rachel as his wife, and so now he has a family. Okay, and his wives aren't actually. I think no. What it is Leia ends up having the first sons. So
Like
she's
the
got like
first four
four.
or
Yeah.
something like that,
So
yeah.
she ends up having the first four herself. Rachel has no children. And what, especially to men today, what we might not understand is a child was incredibly important to women at the time. That was what women did, is they created new human beings. And so that was such a valuable thing for women to be able to do. That's how they brought honor to themselves. And so a woman who didn't have a son was seen as a major dishonor. And so Rachel ends up having
Like
no
a
sons.
judgment almost, do you think?
It can be seen by some women as a judgment from God, and so you'll see the first couple names of actually my pastor Bob was talking about this last night at our Wednesday night service. We're going through the Old Testament, and he was talking about how what is it, Reuben and the first two born from Leah are named in Hebrew. Their names mean God sees and God hears. And so God saw her plight and gave her a son. God heard her prayers and gave her a son, is the meaning behind those names. And
Uh-huh.
so, um,
We miss out on that
yeah,
stuff.
we because we don't translate it. We leave that name as it would be nice if we had both. We had the original like name of it, but then also what the translation means. So you should be reading your Bible with different source books and different materials to help you understand meanings behind things. But back to the point. So, um, it, it like I said, women's value came from having children. And so that's something that we probably don't understand as well today because we have so little value to children, as we were talking about earlier. Um, but that's what it was. And so Rachel was very dishonored because she wasn't having children. And so she ends up putting up her handmaid to have children for her, which is, she's not the first person in this family to do that. As we talked about, that started with Abraham and Sarah. When she wasn't able to have a child, she put up her handmaid Hagar, and that's where Ishmael comes from. And so now we see in Jacob's family that he's having the same kind of thing happen, where his wives are having their handmaids have children for him. So through these four women, we end up with the 12 tribes of Judah. And so we've gone over those tribes before, listed out a couple of the important ones. Levi, or where the priests come from. Judah is where the kings come from, or two of the more important ones that you'll hear about. But they're all important, of course, and part of the nation of Israel. And none of them are lost. A lot of people think that at some point there were lost tribes. There are members of every single tribe that are alive today, and they know that they are a member of that tribe. So just to kind of clear up some misconceptions there.
Okay.
Did you have anything else from chapter 37? Because you were talking about the dream. Did let's read here real quick about the dream. Let me
Yeah, the
see.
dreams are cool.
Yeah, let's see if that's is that in this chapter.
I think so. Joseph.
Okay, yeah, yeah. Here it is, chapter 37, verse 9. Oh, he had two
Oh,
dreams.
it's
So
five. It's five.
yeah, five is the first dream. So I'll read that for us. Chapter 37, verse 5. One night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. Listen to this dream, he said. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. Suddenly, my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. His brothers responded, so you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think you will reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. Soon Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. Listen, I have had another dream, he said. The sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. This time he told the dream to his father, as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. What kind of dream is that? He asked. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? But while his brothers were jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant.
He kind of knew there's something there. Yeah.
Yep. Well, and he's not the youngest. He might be the youngest at this time when this. No, I guess everyone's born. He's like the second youngest, and so out of 12 people, you have this little pipsqueak coming up to you and saying that he's going to be the, he's having these crazy dreams, and he's just this little pipsqueak that's having these crazy dreams, right? Like, can you imagine being Joseph? And I'd want to tell my brothers and everybody those dreams too. Those are pretty crazy.
You can tell throughout reading his whole story that he has this level of innocent righteousness where he's I don't know, like even just reporting back to his dad about what his brothers were doing. A lot of times it gets kind of like portrayed as he's like a tattletale, but I mean, do you want him to not say anything? Do you want him to like see this injustice or see something going wrong, like and then not say anything? It's almost like a issue not to say something. So it's like he has this like innocent righteousness about him that's
Hmm.
really interesting. And
Well,
so,
and one of the things is what a lot of people do is they go and they look for types of Christ in the Old Testament and in different places in the Bible.
what does that
And
mean, like Christ types?
yeah, and so a type of Christ is something that is a type of Christ is someone who reflects different attributes of Jesus Christ prophetically in advance of Jesus coming. And
Oh,
so
okay.
prophecy in Hebrew is a little bit more complicated than our Western ideas of prophecy. When we think of a prophecy, we think of some witch that's reading a tarot card and you get a definite thing that will happen at a specific point in the future. What
Right.
prophecy is for Hebrews and for the Jews is more of a pattern. So when there is a prophecy about someone, there you're going to see shadows of that prophecy happen at different points in time. And so prophetically, God used the story of Joseph's life, which I believe actually happened. I believe every single one of these events took place as it's described in a true sense, whatever that means exactly. And so he used Joseph's life and the recording of that life as a picture of what Jesus Christ's life would look like and what would happen to him. And so you see that Jesus is betrayed by his brothers. Okay, but not directly by his brothers, but he's betrayed by the Jews. And what we miss as Americans is all Jewish people are brothers. They see themselves as more of a family than really an ethnicity or a like people group. And so the Bible tells the Jews to treat everyone like they're a brother. The Bible calls Israelites brothers a lot. And so what we see is in the beginning of this family with these 12 tribes, we see that the other 11 tribes sell Joseph into slavery and forsake one of their brothers. That's a picture of what happens to Christ later on, where the country of Israel forsakes Jesus and sacrifices him on a cross. And so
Um,
you can see different pictures of Jesus's life in different people throughout the Old Testament. And so
and then the
Joseph
same person reconciles them, and yeah, that's
e-
interesting.
exactly. So it's not 100% perfect, of it's not exactly the same story as Jesus Christ, or Jesus wouldn't have needed to be born, right? But it's like I said, it's got different story elements that help you to understand what Jesus is going to be when he comes. And so we can see that in Joseph's story.
So that's another thing that I just wanted to hone in on something you just said. If this, then Jesus wouldn't have had to be born. And so why was it necessary for Jesus to be born, or like to God for God himself to come into the world? Why was that necessary?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the number one thing is that every single person has sinned. So we have all done something that goes against God's will for our lives. We've done something that God doesn't want us to do, and in fact has commanded us not to do. Lie, cheat, steal. If you've done any of that one single time, you're now a sinner. Just like if you go and you murder someone, you're now a murderer. It's just in our human brains,
You'll lie before 5 years old.
yes, there's a stage of human development where that's like it's weird if you don't start lying. Okay? That's how ingrained into our personalities it is that we are horribly evil sinners. The first second that we have the cognitive ability to do it, we start doing it, right? Um and so every single person has done something that would keep them from being anywhere near a holy God. So God is completely 100% perfect without blemish. And so if you were to be in God's presence, it just couldn't exist. You would just cease your existence. And so because of the fact that there's a completely just God and we have been we've done things against that just God, he can't have us in right relationship with him. And so, what he needed to do was send someone down as a sacrifice for us. So, he needed what we needed to, in order to be able to be with God, God had to be both perfectly just, but then he's also a perfectly merciful God. He loves us, he cares about us, and wants to have mercy on us. And so, instead of us being able to work towards our salvation like every other religion believes. Every other religion tells you that you're going to have to work, you're going to have to pray, you're going to have to do all of these things for God, raise money, do these great things for God in order for him to let you into heaven. That's just not the case. There is nothing that we could do to wash ourselves of the stain of the sin that we have. And so God had to send his son down to die for us. He lives a perfect life, died for us as a penal substitutionary atonement for that sin that we committed. So I'm sure I'm getting a little bit too complicated here. If you have anything to add,
For
or
the Christianese, that just meant he paid our debt instead of us having to pay our debt. And so I'm s- I'm supposed to die for my sins because I've
mm-hmm,
sinned. And Jesus died for my sins and your sins too, if you want to
yep,
put your faith in Jesus. So basically, penal substitutionary atonement is kind of like he atoned for my sins in my stead. And so that's what's so beautiful about Jesus is the God who demands justice came down and let it be served upon him, which is so nice. It's such a beautiful thing.
amen, yep. And so back to the types discussion. So Joseph is a type of Jesus, in my opinion, and a lot of other pastors have done sermons on that as well. And so what we see is that ultimately he ends up saving Israel, and by Israel I mean the family. And so, but the other thing is, through the trials and tribulations that Joseph went through, all of the known world was saved at that time. So at that time, the whole world in the Bible was basically Egypt. That's what they were talking about when they said the world came. Like they're not talking about the actual whole earth in some instances. And so
It's the
through
biggest civilization at that point where everybody was just
exactly.
there.
And so because of Joseph and his faithfulness and the dream interpretation that he did and all of that, because God gave him those dreams and those interpretations, because of that, the entire world got saved, is kind of the picture that's being painted. Again, Egypt isn't the whole world, and I'm not saying that it is, but that's kind of the picture that's being painted, where the whole nation of Israel is saved through the 12 members of the tribes, the 12 children of Israel, and then the rest of the world, as pictured in Egypt, is saved by Joseph through the visions that God gave him. And so that's a picture of Jesus' life in advance.
Oh, interesting. Okay. All right. So let's continue on into chapter 38. Um, this is about one of Joseph's brothers. This one's interesting. It kind of focuses around Judah and Tamar. And so Judah married a Canaanite woman and had three sons. His eldest son, was wicked in the sight of the Lord. Um, Basically, long story short, is he was wait. Let me try to. Okay. Anyway, he was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he dies. According to custom, Judah's second son Onan is supposed to father a child with his brother's widow Tamar, but he refuses and also dies, um, because he was down to engage with one aspect of procreation, but not the other. And so he kind of attempts like a birth control, and it was wicked in the sight of the Lord. And I'm pretty sure that's why he was killed by the Lord. I'm not sure what your take is on that. That's just kind of what I gathered from reading the text. But Judah promises Tamar his youngest son. Um, his name is Sheila, but he doesn't fulfill his promise, and Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute and becomes pregnant by Judah. When Judah learns of uh, her pregnancy, he kind of recognizes his wrongdoing, and this story was a little bit complicated, and all I kind of understand is that she was promised a husband, and it doesn't happen, and it seems like she tricks Judah into sleeping with her, and I'm not. So it's like I really I think there's something going on here. I just don't understand what's all going on here. So what's going on in this story, and like why is it important?
Yeah, so one of the things that we don't again understand as modern Western people is how important people's generations are, how important your lineage is. And so what we see here is that these people valued lineage and name very highly. And one of the things that is a Jewish custom is the next of kin. If a man marries a woman and then that man dies, the next of kin for that man has the right to go and marry that woman and take over that
For-
man's household.
Was it for the sole purpose of providing a child like an heir? Was that like the
So
reasoning?
the reason, so what you would do as part of this custom is the woman, you would have that woman as your wife, and she, if she produces a male child for you, that child actually takes on the name of the
The
other
husband who
man,
was deceased?
the deceased
Oh,
man, and so
interesting.
his lineage continues on. So
Nice. That's actually cool because
yeah.
I'm like just kind of tangent really quick. My grandfather asked me to carry on his name, which is my mom's dad. And
Hmm.
my mom and dad never got married, and so my dad is one of like six brothers, and there's just so many men in that family. And so basically, I'm taking on my mom's dad's last name so that his last name and his lineage kind of continues on. So this I can kind of
Hmm.
relate a little bit
Yeah.
in that sense, right?
Yeah, very very similar. And so, your grandfather valued his lineage and his last name, and it's cool that you can have that pass through you and pass that on, right, to your children. And so the real reason why this was set up was to protect the woman, I believe. So you had to give men an incentive why they would do it, right? So they get the land and the property and probably some amount of prestige. But the reason it's being done is because the women needed to be taken care of and protected. And so this was a way to ensure that that happened. It was a way where every woman, every Israelite woman knew that there was a backup in case this man died, and that happens frequently. There's wars and famines and just so many things. Like, we have death and disease in our country today. Of course, obviously everyone dies, but it was just such at the doorstep. Every single, every month had a different potential calamity that could kill somebody. You know, flooding one
Yeah.
month, drought the next month, famine, disease, pestilence, like bugs, locusts, like they're just crazy things happen in the ancient world, and such a frequent rate compared to what happens today, where a lot of people basically end up dying of old age and disease, right? In our
Yeah.
country today, not starvation or, you know, axe wounds. Most people don't die from being, property disputes these days, though there are some. So, yeah. Where are we at? Where you're asking a
So then
question? Oh, yeah, yeah.
she has the baby with Judah.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that significant? Like, was she kind of not connected to anybody and then is now because she has this baby with Judah? Is Judah like a big player in like the tribes of Israel or something?
So Judah is ultimately one of in the line of Christ. So Christ comes from the line
Oh,
from the tribe of Judah. I'm not sure. He might go through Tamar. Actually, I'm not sure.
it's
Uh,
interesting that because Tamar and Bathsheba get added to the line of Christ in an interesting ways, right?
mm-hmm. Yep.
So really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting that God can use these Gentile women and put them into the lineage of Christ, and it's almost like a way of including us in the lineage of Christ. So of course, as a
What do you mean?
Gentile, I'm not in the same. I'm not in the lineage of Christ at all. I'm not a Jew in any way, shape, or form. But despite the fact that these women weren't Jews, they were able to come into the tribe of Judah and were able to be grafted into it, even though that's not what God had originally prescribed for them. Does that make sense? So like,
Okay, yeah,
it's an image of what Christ did for us. Christ,
yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah.
the the church is grafted into the tree of faith with Abraham and the rest of his family of the Jews and all the other believers that exist outside of Abraham, but are in his tree. Okay, we're grafted in this in a similar way to those women were grafted into the Jewish society, and they got salvation from that. Okay, they
We're
weren't
grafted in by
left.
marriage.
Exactly. And yeah, that's true to a certain extent. That's why we're called the bride of Christ. So, exactly. And that's what we see here is just that God has provisions to take care of his people. That's ultimately what that is supposed to tell us is that and the other thing is, it might seem wrong for her to do what she did, and in some ways it is, but she had been wronged by the other by Judah, right? Despite that, and so he had promised her his youngest son, and then had reneged on that promise. And so when we see the fulfillment of that, it's what should have happened, just not the right way.
What did he do to not fulfill that? Did he just said like psych? Never mind.
So he had promised her his youngest son, and they kept dying, and
Oh,
so
well, I mean, it's not his fault, but
it's
yeah.
not his fault, but and you can understand why he wouldn't want to keep sacrificing his sons to her. Essentially, is what it
It's like
seemed
there's
like.
something going on here.
That's I'm not claiming that's what was happening. I'm not claiming
I
she
know, I
was
know.
she was harming them, but that's essentially what it seemed like. You know how
He
we
probably
in
got
our
superstitious or something.
well, exactly. Just think about in our society, we have these women that are seen as black widows. Have you heard that term?
No, I don't know what that means.
So there, a woman that's described as a black widow is a younger woman who goes and marries an older man, and then he mysteriously dies, and she takes on his fortune.
Oh, interesting.
Um,
Okay.
and then she goes and does it again, and then goes and does it again. Right? That is a stereotype of woman today. Like there's TV shows and stuff that use it,
Okay.
and so that I would assume that that's a stereotype that goes all the way back to this, to this story, where she was seen as like kind of a curse, probably.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's a.
Alrighty.
Again, I highly recommend that our listeners and watchers go and read this story themselves. It's about the last 10 chapters of Genesis is the story of Joseph, and I just love it. I love this story. It's so
Last 13.
last
Yeah.
13, yeah. And so I just love it. It's a great story of it just It's just a great story.
It is. It's really
um,
good. He seems like a cool person. Yeah.
okay, so we took this side tour over with Judah and Tamar in chapter 38. Did you have anything else in chapter 38 you wanted to talk about, or are we ready to move on
No, we can
to
move on. I just
39?
wanted to I what I learned from that was she because so she waited on the side of the road, disguised herself as a prostitute, slept with Judah, and became grafted into the line of Jesus Christ. Super crazy.
Uh,
That's pretty
I
awesome.
think let me look up the line of Jesus Christ. Let me look that up. I want to make sure she's actually in the line, but it's she's at the very least she's in the tribe of she's in the tribe of Judah, and in she's say it doesn't make sense. So
I unfortunately need to go to the bathroom. Can I take this time to go
yeah,
real
yeah.
quick? All right, sweet.
Okay, so while he's using the restroom, let me switch over our feed to me. I'm gonna look up the lineage of Christ, and we will see if Tamar is in it. Okay. Oh, Jesus Family Tree. I don't know who this is or anything about this website, so I'm not endorsing it in any way, shape, or form. But nope, that won't be easy for anybody to see. Okay. Tamar is in Jesus' genealogy, it appears. Okay. Yes. So Tamar is in the genealogy of Christ, and that is again that's important because like I was saying, it's God's way of providing for us and showing us that he will take care of us in any of the situations that comes about in our lives. Now, as Christians, we don't always believe that Jesus will keep us alive right now. This life, this body isn't the ultimate reality. Ultimately, what Christianity teaches is that there's a reality that's above and beyond this one that exists in dimensions that we can't even comprehend. And that's funny enough what science is starting to teach us as well. And so what the Bible teaches is that after the end of at the that there will be a time where we get new bodies from Christ and we will be able to live like Christ.
All
So
right.
yep. Hey, Austin, I was just looking up the genealogy of Jesus, and it does look like Tamar is in the genealogy of Jesus. So that's why this story was told. I would assume is because ultimately Jesus Christ would come out of that line. So that's what we see.
Yeah, it's again kind of similar how Bathsheba got into that line as well. All right, let's
Is it
move.
is it Bathsheba? Because Bathsheba was a Jewess. I believe you're thinking of
I'm
is it?
no, I'm saying because she and eventually becomes the wife of David, and Jesus becomes
Okay, yeah. Gotcha.
and then she has Solomon, and then isn't Jesus in the line of Solomon or something like that? Or
Yes, you are correct.
okay,
What I thought you were saying is there's another instance in the Old Testament where a woman is saved by this. So the person who ends up marrying the woman in the situation is called a kinsman redeemer. If you've ever heard that term before,
is that like the one that marries the widow?
yes. So the person who marries a widow is called a kinsman redeemer, and the reason they use that word is because kinsman is just a fancy word for like brother or close relative. It just
Okay,
means your closest relative. And redeemer, what they're doing is they are redeeming that wife and redeeming that property, and they are going to provide. Hopefully, that woman is to provide a son to continue the male line of to redeem that male line. So that's where that term
okay.
kind of comes from. If you ever hear kinsman redeemer, it shows up in your Bible a couple times in the Old Testament. Specifically, a good book to read if you're interested in kinsman redeemers and in more of this kind of a story would be Ruth. That is a book. It's only 4 chapters, and it's a good story that kind of explains this whole process a little bit better. And one of the books
Okay.
that a lot of people probably haven't read out of the because most people haven't read the Old Testament. So
I know, like, isn't like Ruth like David's great grandma, something
I
like that?
believe so. Yeah. Boaz and Ruth. Yep, I believe so.
All right, so we're gonna move right on into chapter 39. And this is the chapter where we get introduced to Potiphar and the whole situation with his wife. And so basically Joseph gets sold to the captain or someone in charge of the prison, right? And so an officer of Pharaoh and also the prison. And so God blesses Joseph and he gains favor in Potiphar's eyes and makes him kind of in charge of the steward of all of his stuff. And so Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph in a series of attempts, but he ultimately refuses her advances. And what ends up happening one day is the Potiphar's gone, and then I don't know if she like forces herself onto him or something like that, but grabs him essentially, and he in a fight or flight mode goes, okay, run, and then he just runs. And so in this exchange, she keeps onto his shirt and he's like, all right, and then it comes off, and then he just books it out of there. She immediately starts screaming and
Mm-hmm.
screaming, and then when people show up, she falsely accuses Joseph of raping her. And so this is another interesting thing because I'm gonna ask you a question here, but Joseph is, unjustly subsequently thrown in prison. And so in this account, and one of the things in the definitions of love that you find in Ephesians is we're supposed to seek understanding. I think that's in the definition of love. But anyway, so zero people kind of come up to Joseph and kind of want to hear anything from him, and so he didn't get to report anything about the incident, especially being somebody of such high regard. You'd think that would, being in charge of this guy's entire estate, you'd think he'd get some kind of, something to say about it. But this is definitely tricky.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely know if my wife came and said something to me, I would just, believe her, So what should
Yep.
be done in this situation? Was Potiphar right to accept the testimony of his wife in this situation?
So, one thing, again, a difference between our society today and the ancient world is that we don't understand that there is a difference between classes of people. Okay, so in Egyptian society and in most societies, there were people who were citizens and were full blooded, Egyptians. There were people that were somewhere in between, and then there were slaves. And so the lowest people on this totem pole, the last person you would ever take any word from is a slave. And it makes sense to a certain extent. If you have people who are enslaved, obviously they're going to be complaining all the time. Obviously they're going to be making up lies and things to get out of punishment. They're going to be making up lies to get, their masters in trouble with people. Like the fact that a slave would tell a lie, it's like do you is like it's like breathing. They would say a slave lying is like a slave breathing is essentially the same thing, right? They're just doing it
What's it
all
to
the
them to
time.
tell a lie? Yeah.
Um, and so that's number one. You just would never ever a slave's testimony just wouldn't even count in court, more than likely. Okay, uh, it would be like if you brought a cow to court and wanted to submit the cow's testimony. It would be how they saw bringing up a slave's testimony.
It's just so far-fetched to even listen to somebody in that position. It's interesting that like what yeah, he's a slave because he's sold. So
Yep.
he's just a very important slave with a lot of
He
responsibility.
Yeah, and so you even in the South, as horrible as slavery was here, like the version of slavery that we have today is far worse than not today. Obviously, we don't have slavery today. Let me restate that. The version of slavery that we have in America's history is the worst version of slavery imaginable. So that's kind of what we see as our baseline for slavery. That's not what slavery was in the ancient world. But
Back then, it was like if I broke your very expensive thing and I just had no funds to pay it back, unfortunately, the law says that I have to become your slave until I pay off what I owe you. And so you just became indentured servants if you just couldn't pay
mhm,
back debts. And so that's
yes.
just how it was back then. It wasn't like how it gets portrayed, and
Um
unfortunately.
Well, okay, there's two things to that. So what you described would be Israelite versions of slavery, the slavery that God is talking about in the Old Testament.
Oh, Oh,
Okay,
okay.
that's what God is referring to as slavery when he's okay with it in the Old Testament. And by okay with it, I mean he accepts it as a practice and doesn't say it's evil
I mean, because you
and
have to
forbid it.
release them on the seventh year. They're only slaves
Yes.
for 6 years.
So and that was because they're all brothers, and so it was a way to pay off
Oh,
debts. But
oh.
because they're all brothers, at some point you pay off your debt to your brother, and it gets forgiven. But yeah,
It
so
even says too, like if I'm not sure if this has to do with Hebrew slaves, but it said like if you strike your slave and blind an eye, or if you strike your slave and knock a tooth out, they get to be released on behalf of the
mm-hmm,
tooth and the eye. So
yep,
there was a lot of like you don't mess with your slaves. Like there was a whole like just treat them right. And then
yep,
other on the other coin, it was like if you're a slave, serve with like integrity and like just be righteous and work honestly. I think unfortunately like I think that's what Paul says later on in the epistles and stuff. Like if you have a master, work well to represent Christ and stuff like that.
yeah. And again, if you're interested in this, a book to check out, it's literally like one chapter. I think it's Philemon, and so the
Oh,
letter of Philemon was Paul writing to Philemon, a slave master who had a slave run away from him and convert to Christ. And so this slave master was also a Christian as well. And what Paul was doing is he was actually pleading that the slave master release the slave that ran away to Paul. And so that's an interesting little story to read there. Well, it's interesting that Paul isn't saying that slavery is evil and you should release him because slavery is evil and wrong. He's pleading with him to release him based on the fact that
he
it's
converted to
kind and
Christ.
just. It's not even that
Oh,
he converted to Christ, but that it's a kind and it's a kind thing to do, and Paul needs this person. So there's kind of two reasons for it. So that's again,
oh.
that's a little letter to go check out if you're interested in seeing
I
kind
did
of.
know I thought it was called Philemon or something like that, but it's like it's really short. It's really
Hmm.
really short.
Yeah, so you can read a whole book in about 5 to 10 minutes if you want to go feel good about yourself and how good you are at reading the Bible. Go tell all
Yeah.
your friends I read the Bible. I read a book of the Bible in 5 minutes. But um, so yeah, what we see is that a slave's testimony just wouldn't be heard at all. It just isn't even a thing. And then the other thing is let's look at our modern society and how we would deal with this same situation. We just recently had a thing a couple years back called Me Too. Remember the Me Too situations that people
Um,
got into,
I
where
heard about it. I didn't really listen to a whole lot of stuff about it. I kind of understand the
yeah,
premise, but go ahead.
we don't need to get into it. I think most people understand what it is. Women making accusations, and we should just believe all women. That was kind of the point of the Me Too movement. And so, especially like you said, husbands and wives, you're just going to default to believing your wife over basically anybody else. And so that's the other problem that Joseph had is the optics were horrible. He ran out of her room naked, right? So it looked like he was
Oh,
trying to do something. So like even if he did have anything to say, it's still not backed up. It's then the question is, so how did you get naked?
oh,
Right? And
I don't even know what he should have done in this situation. Should he have ran to the doorstep and started screaming? Like, I
oh,
don't know what he should have done.
so ultimately this whole situation was set up by God. It was set up by
Oh,
God to further the story of Joseph and to put Joseph in the place that he needed to be in order to save all of Egypt and to save his family. That's that's
he
what we're
ends up going
supposed to
to the
see.
Pharaoh's prison, right, or something like that.
Exactly. So he is in prison, and it's the same prison where two other people that work for Pharaoh ultimately end up, and we'll see that in the future
Mm,
chapters.
yeah, that's coming up right
Yeah,
right
yeah, yeah.
after this. All
So
right.
we'll get
So
right into that, I guess.
ultimately, yeah, ultimately, I guess we should um our wives are in a place of honor, and so like I guess we should definitely just take their testimony for what it is, because like
Well,
as a husband too, if some questionable thing happened, you'd want your wife to believe you, right? So it's I don't know.
I don't believe that we should act the same way that Potiphar acted. So if you look at him, he was in a Gentile society that had a bunch of evil and wrong things that were part of it. And so this story isn't to say that Potiphar did everything right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, he's not supposed to come out looking good in this. You know, him believing his wife wasn't necessarily the right thing to do here. It's what needed to happen for the story to be furthered the way that it was. But I don't think we shouldn't be making our decisions based off of what Potiphar did, and he didn't do things correctly. It's just understandable what happened. It's understandable that a man believes his wife and trusts his wife over other people, but there's situations where you shouldn't do that. I think this is an example of that.
You should. I think where you should draw the line is you shouldn't ignore evidence. Like, I
Yeah.
don't
Well,
know.
yeah.
Like,
Well,
if
and the
I'm
other thing,
obviously guilty of a crime and I'm lying to my wife and I'm like, no, I didn't do it. Like, I think it's unjust of her to look at some overwhelming evidence and be like, yeah, sure.
well,
I
well, and
don't-
the other thing is you also it's also a warning to people that you should know who your wife is, right? Potiphar should have
Oh,
known that
I didn't
his wife
even.
was like that.
That's why I like the Bible. Is like you could read the same book over and over and over again. There's so many layers to this.
Mm-hmm.
It's really crazy.
Yeah,
All right.
and so
Yeah, you
like
should know your wife.
he should have known that his wife was trying to sleep around and you know, you should know what's going on in
They're
your own
also in
household.
Egypt. That's like a thing. Like they're just really sexually messed up in Egypt.
Probably.
There's a
Yeah.
lot of yeah,
So
there's a lot of weird stories that come out of Egypt with that stuff.
yeah, definitely.
All right, let's move on over. We've got now we're going into chapter 40. And so Joseph inevitably following the events of chapter 39, Potiphar throws Joseph into Pharaoh's prison, I'm assuming. And so while in this prison, Joseph meets Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. And just really quick, what's a cupbearer? Like what? I don't know what that
Yeah.
means. Is that like the poison guy who tests the wine and drinks it
Yes.
first? Like, oh,
Exactly.
okay. I
So
guessed
so
it. Yes.
so the number one job of the cupbearer was to literally just have the cup and be responsible for it. So like you had to put a lot of trust into this person, okay? Because you were trusting them that they weren't going to be the ones poisoning your drink, and there could be,
Oh,
you know,
they
and
could do
so,
it.
hmm
Dang.
yeah, well, of course, and you know, and it's their responsibility to bear it. That's why they're burying it because they're protecting it from being poisoned. So on top of them being capable of poisoning it, they also have their job is to protect it from being poisoned and to know that it's not, you know, right. And so that's the cupbearer's job. And then they also would take, I believe they would taste the food as well, that sort of thing.
Do you happen to know what food and drink was being poisoned with in medieval times like this and just like old times like that?
Not specifically, the same kinds of stuff we get poisoned with now. You know, I would imagine. And, you know, you look at like what is it? Is it Aristotle who died of hemlock? He ate hemlock or drank hemlock. So there's always
What's
been different.
hemlock? I'm not even
It's like a
familiar.
plant. It's like a plant. I think he made it into like a tea that he drank that killed him.
Oh wow. That's
I
interesting. Oh,
believe.
I guess you could just okay, you could just take poisonous plants and herbs and
Yeah,
just make
exactly.
a little concoct. Okay. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. All right.
Yep.
So we've got to continue. All right. So Joseph meets Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker, who are also imprisoned. Both of them have dreams, and Joseph interprets them accurately. And it's funny. So he interprets the first dream of the cupbearer, and basically he's like, "Yeah, you're gonna be restored to your position. Pharaoh's gonna like take you out of jail, and you're gonna be restored to your position." Baker kind of like sees this, and he's like, all right, I'll tell you about my dream," and tells him about his dream. And then uh Joseph's like, "Well, you are actually going to be executed." And it's unfortunate. Like it's like he's like, "Okay, I want to know what my dream has to say too." And it's like bad news. And he ends up actually dying too. So it's he tells the cupbearer that he'll be restored to his position, but the baker will be executed. Joseph asks the cupbearer to remember him and help him get out of prison, but the cupbearer eventually just forgets about him. So once he ends up getting out of prison, the cupbearer just totally forgets.
Can you
Yeah.
imagine? Can you imagine this? You had a dream. This random guy in prison interprets the dream, and then it comes true, and you just forget.
Yeah,
Like,
and you're just like, sick, thanks. I'll see you later.
But
But
like,
he later on eventually goes, "Oh yeah, there was this
yeah,
guy." And
but it's
so
just
it eventually comes out, but
for me, it's interesting to see, and I recommend everybody look at the Bible this way. This is one of the lenses you should look through it in. Is what are the things that they're forgetting? Okay, that's a big deal, right? If you'd think you would remember someone, if you had a dream, someone interpreted it and got it right, I'd remember that. But then on top of that, like it comes true, the other guy ends up dying, like, and you just forget
everything's
about this
yeah,
guy,
yeah, that's
you know?
nuts.
And so it's interesting, like you see the same thing later on with the Jews leaving Egypt. So right now we're at the story where the Jews enter Egypt as a family, and then 400 years later in Exodus they're going to leave as a nation. And what we see there is they go out, they just all the whole entire nation, every single man, woman, and child literally walked through a miracle where the waters parted. Before that they saw
And then the
waters
winds
turning
blew
into
over the ground and
mm-hmm.
dried it. Yeah,
They had
the
seen the 10 plagues of Egypt, right? That
Egypt.
that God
Yeah.
put onto Egypt. They had seen the Passover. They saw all of these crazy miracles, okay? Literally just the most insane things you could ever possibly imagine.
The cloud by
Okay.
day and pillar of fire
They're
by night.
they're
Yeah.
literally following a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And so they get out, and they're and Moses is up on the mountain getting the 10 commandments from God, and they start worshiping a golden bull. They
Wasn't it because he
have
took too long? He didn't come down in a
yes,
timely manner or something? So
basically, yeah, he took too long and they felt like he had abandoned them. Okay? They literally just saw God like moving water, God doing the most crazy miracles, and they forgot. And they just immediately started worshiping idols. Like
yeah,
for all
and every other I was gonna say, and every other week they were also saying like, "Oh, are we gonna die in the wilderness? Are you gonna give us water?" And then like they'd be cool, and then like, oh, another week later, "Oh, we're gonna die." Yeah, they just kept forgetting. It's
I
unfortunate.
and so my point is I just want people to be aware of the things that we're capable of forgetting, or like to the atheists that say that you would need some kind that they would need some kind of evidence, or they want God to show up and appear before them. Okay, anybody that's saying that, the Bible proves that that's just not even a thing. Okay.
He did that, and they didn't care.
Mm-hmm. Jesus Christ came down, lived a life, lived a perfect life in front of everybody. There's written records of it better than any human being in history. Okay. And you still don't believe it. So even if he came down and appeared before you and did a miracle in front of you, it's unlikely that you would believe in Jesus Christ even then. And so
Well, if you didn't have pics, there is no proof. You know what I mean? So
what Pixar it didn't happen?
yeah, so if there's not like at this point in the day
Yeah.
and age that we're at, if you don't have video testimony or evidence, then we really don't want to touch it because like that's just how we want our information now. We just want to be able to like view it and absorb it and think about it and stuff like that. So if somebody appeared to you, like if Jesus literally appeared to you and you were not recording and you try to convey this to other people, they just still wouldn't believe you. Even it's yeah.
Yep. And so, I bring that up because it's very easy for people to think that we don't have enough evidence for the Bible, or we don't have enough evidence for Jesus or for all of these things. And my point is, what would be good enough evidence? Look at the Bible. Look at the predictions that it made. Look at the prophecies that it has. Look at the sum total of everything that's in it, and it's perfect. And right there for you to go read, and you still don't believe it. Why would I believe that even if somebody came down in front of you, that would make a difference? You know?
Yeah, it's kind of like God, the story of Lazarus when he's like, "Well, at least let me go back and tell my family that and warn them about this how bad it is over here." And he's like, "Well, no, because Moses and the prophets wrote about it, and if they're not going to listen to Moses and the prophets, then they're not going to listen to you." And so
Exactly. Yes.
it's pretty nuts. Yeah.
Yep. That's exactly my point. All right. Sorry for that little side jag there.
Oh no, it's
Um.
it's good. It's good. All right, so
Perfect.
let's see where we're at. Baker will be executed. Joseph asks the cupbearer to remember him and get out of prison, but the cupbearer forgets about him. And so this is really interesting. Joseph, I wanted to ask you about this because it's kind of like the same with Daniel. Joseph's whole attitude towards interpreting dreams seemed to be like, well, interpreting dreams is God's business. So tell me what your dream is. Almost kind
Mm-hmm.
of implying like, well, God does that, and I'm with Him. So tell me what it is. And then without batting an eye, as soon as they told him what the dream was, he's just like, okay, yeah, so this is what it means. And so, my question here is like, how did he know how to do that? And like, it's kind of like I, on an earlier episode, you were like, this could have been passed down from family stuff, and I'm almost like, how did he like understand how to interpret a dream like that? Like,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
where would he have gotten that knowledge and stuff? Yeah.
So if we want to look at the family that he's from, I mean, his grandfather is Abraham, or great grandfather is Abraham.
Right.
Okay, and so that's a man that who literally was communing with and walking with God in ways that we don't understand. Uh, and I guess so. Let me restate that. So we have a closeness with God and with Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit that nobody in the Old Testament had except at fleeting moments. So like it talks about how God's Spirit was with David when he was king at certain points, and then it left him at different points, and he felt dejected because of it. Because of Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made, we now have the Holy Spirit. And so we can have that closeness and that intimacy with God whenever we want. And not whenever we want. We have it all the time, and we aren't going to lose that because of our sin or anything like that. But if you look at the family that Joseph has come from, they have been the most connected to God of anybody since like Noah. Okay, it basically
Okay.
goes Adam and Eve, the two most connected to God people there ever were, and that until we're all in heaven, the most you could possibly be connected to God ever, right? Like that's that's Adam and Eve. They were the closest. They walked with him. They were created directly by him, and so they're the closest. Next would be like Noah. Noah. Next would be everybody else that existed before the flood. But then the next closest to us would be like Noah, where he got commanded by God to do something very specific, somehow knew exactly what to do and how to build it, even though there hadn't been ships before that point. Definitely not like that. And so somehow he got these direct commands, and to be honest, it's actually pretty mysterious. We don't exactly know how Abraham received the word from God to know that he needed to go to Canaan. It just says God told Abraham and he did it, right? And that could mean that it came to him in a dream. It could mean that God came down and actually talked to him and communed with him and interacted with him in a certain way. It could mean that he just intuitively knew it. It could mean that there was a conversation going on in his head. It could mean that there was a burning bush that appeared before Abraham and God spoke out of the burning bush and Abraham spoke back to it. There's a whole host of different ways God could be communicating with people. Uh, and I don't know if there's any one way that God does it or if he kind of does it in a specific way to each person. Does that make sense? So, like,
Yeah.
the burning bush, we see God communicating with Moses in a very physical location, right? That area was holy ground. That area, the voice of God was coming from the burning bush. So that was how God talked to Moses there. Does he continue talking with Moses in that same way through burning bushes throughout the desert? That's possible, but that's not recorded anywhere that I'm aware of. And so,
Okay.
I think that God reaches out to us in a way that we will be able to hear him, however that is. So clearly, God was interpreting these dreams for Joseph and communicating that to him somehow. That's the most we can say.
Yeah, because I know that I would that's supported by like when Daniel's like, I don't know, but there's a God in heaven who reveals, mysteries to men, right? And so he knows how to interpret dreams, and but I think it's something like that. He acknowledges that it's not him
Yeah,
when he does it. So
and I think the one thing I wanted to say as well is that I think it also happens. It also occurs when with your proximity to God, when you're doing the things that God has commanded you to do, and you're drawing near and you're closer to God. He's going to give you these sorts of things. So if you're faithfully praying as much as you should be, if you're fasting, if you're going to church, and if you're doing the things that God wants you to be doing and drawing closer to Him, He's going to come closer to you, and you're going to meet, and He's going to communicate with you in a deeper and more personal way the closer that you go to Him, and the more faith that you have in Him.
Can you touch on fasting? I'm really uneducated on just why, like, I'm still like I want to do it. I'm just
Hmm.
trying to understand like why, like what is the purpose? Because what I've gathered is like it's almost like showing God that like his word is more important than food, but like uh is it like to experience God in a different way, or like just kind of tell me more about fasting?
It's probably one of those things that I'm the least knowledgeable about. But what
No
knowledge
worries.
I do have, m- my guess, and again, this is just a guess, so I'm not trying to speak from the Bible here, but my guess is that when you deprive yourself of things, you become more aware of other things in your life. So that, like, if you were to close your eyes, you're going to focus more on your hearing, you're going to focus more on your smell and your touch, right? So if you deprive yourself of one sense, it opens you up to getting more information from other senses. And so I think that's kind of what's happening on a spiritual level. When you deprive yourself of food, it opens you up to seeing how God has provided that food for you in the past, and how it's such a blessing that He hopefully will continue to provide it for you in the future. So that's one thing, and it just it's a huge part of your day. So preparing food, going and eating food, talking with people, all of that takes a lot of time in your day. And so, literally,
Yeah.
just by cutting out meals, you're opening up an extra hour, 2 hours, 3 hours in your day where you can think about and care about God more. So, those are just a couple things off the top of my head. Uh, it's just also something in the New Testament that we're commanded to do. We are commanded to approach certain things with prayer and fasting. If there is that's just how God wants us to do it.
It's just weird because like fasting instructions are just not there, so it's almost like a buried tradition thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know how to define a fast, what the regulations are. It might not even be about that. It might just be about skipping meals. But am I supposed to
So,
fast for 24 hours? Like, this is what I don't know because it's like not
yeah,
there.
and I like that. I'm very appreciative that the Bible doesn't just prescribe everything for us. Okay, it says that we need to do certain things like fasting, but it
Open-endedly.
but it doesn't prescribe exactly what a fast means. And so, what the Jews would do, when they would fast, is they would fast from evening until morning, and they'd fast from evening until evening. So at sunset they'd stop eating, and then at sunset the next day they'd start eating. And so,
So like only dinner. They're only eating dinner or something like
no,
that.
no, they're not eating. They wouldn't eat anything for that 24-hour period.
Oh.
Okay, and so
No, I mean like so you eat dinner on Monday and then you eat nothing until dinner on Tuesday, something like that.
kind of. I don't know if they had the same meal times that we do.
Oh, okay.
That's a whole other topic. But our 3 square meals a day is not a biological necessity that we have. It's just something that our culture does, actually. So
We
that's
only
a
need enough calories to get through what we're trying to do, huh?
uh. It's hard to. I don't know. I don't know the actual right answer for what we need. I don't think very many people, if anybody, know exactly what we need. But it's not 3 meals. You're not supposed to eat in the morning, at noon, and at 6 p.m. That's not like biologically prescribed by our bodies.
I
Um,
know that in like Exodus, God's like, I'll have meat for you at in the evening and I'll have bread for you in the morning. So there's probably at least two meals that you'll have, like, right? Something
mhm.
to eat at one point early and one point at late. You know what I mean? So I'm sure because
Yeah,
I don't get hungry 3 times a day. It's usually twice. Like
that's
I'm
pretty
not a
much where I'm
breakfast
at
eater.
too. I don't eat breakfast
Yeah,
either. That's
I'll
so
eat like
funny.
lunch before work, and then my tummy starts grumbling like 6 hours into my shift, and then I'm like ready to eat again. But that's like kind of it, right?
Yep,
Uh,
yep. Uh, and so, yeah, it's nice that the Bible is open ended on like fasting, and so it's not saying you have to do 2 days of fasting when you have this problem, or 3 days of fasting when you have this problem. It's open to you being able to give to God what you can. And so if you start
Is
off
it
and you
always
start off,
food?
um, biblically, that's my understanding. I know that culturally today, there are a lot of Christians that fast from their cell phone or fast from social media or, fast from the computer. They fast from modern
It could
conveniences.
be that those conveniences are more important in a postmodern sense than food. Like we value our car and our cell phone way more than like, McDonald's. So it's
So I don't disagree with you on that. That is basically the reasoning that people use. At least that's my understanding. So I'm not saying they're wrong, but I take the Bible very seriously. And when it says fast, it means food. Okay. When
oh,
it says
okay.
when it says to do something with prayer and fasting, it's not saying to give up your cell phone. Again,
Okay.
that might be a good thing to do. And I'm not saying that God doesn't honor you giving up your cell phone to honor him. Okay?
He
Does that
sees
make
your
sense?
heart and your
Yes.
intentions. If you're trying to do something for him, he sees it. But to be accurate to fasting, what
Mhm.
you're saying biblically, it's always been food.
Don't I wouldn't claim that I am doing something with prayer and fasting if I'm the one that just redefined what fasting is, right? That's you can't just redefine fasting to mean cell phone. You can't redefine fasting to mean anything other than food. That's what it meant when the author wrote that word down. Fasting meant starving yourself and denying yourself of food.
And so a baseline level 1 fast would be like 24 hours.
I'm not gonna put a number on it.
I'm
Whatever.
asking because I want to do it.
Yeah, yeah. Honestly, like skip a meal. That could be a fast, and to a certain
Okay.
extent, right? So just
Work up
the
to 24 hours.
exactly you can, and there's a book that I bought. I haven't read it yet. I don't even know where it is at this point, but
It's on
it's
that
a
book. It's on that bookshelf. That's right.
yeah, um, but so it describes how to do fasting, and actually the like crazy people that end up doing the ton of fasting, there are ways where you can fast up to like 30 and 40 days.
Yeah, I actually was listening to Paul Washer on this, and he was saying when he goes into extended fasting, he like fills up on vegetables right before, just a lot of vitamin rich things. Like he tries to eat as healthy as possible before he goes into like an extended fast. Because I
Yeah.
was looking up content on this because I really wanted to know. Because like
Mm-hmm.
fasting seems like, because I want to experience more things because I've been a Christian for I'm coming up on 2 years now or 3 years now, this September. So it's
Nice.
like I've done a lot of stuff, and fasting is a box I want to check. And because I want to experience why God wants us to do it, because like if I'm over here fasting and I just feel connected, like I feel like more connected to God and stuff, then I'd be fasting all the time. Like, do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's one of those things. I'm
Um.
curious to see what that'll bring.
Yeah. If I were you, and I've done this, I'd look into reasons why you would fast. So again, it's a lot of times it says to do something with prayer and fasting. I'd look up what that is, and I'd challenge everyone to anybody can go. Again, not anybody. If you have some medical condition or there's something wrong with you, I apologize
Most
and I pray
healthy
for you.
individuals.
But if you're a healthy individual in the United States, you can go a day without eating. I can't
Consult your
imagine.
physician before fasting.
um, especially if you have any medical conditions. But
And we're not doctors. Yeah, we're not
no, I'm
doctors.
not a doctor, and I'm not telling you to go do anything dangerous. I'm just saying I can't imagine a scenario where somebody can't go a single day without food. It might suck. You'll be hungry all day, but it was a normal condition of human beings to go a day or 2 days without food 100 years ago. Okay, like it's not been that long where we've been in our society where we've had a society like we have today where we have just such a crazy abundance.
Just
And
hope
the
that you have some cold, refreshing water if you're gonna be fasting, man. Like, can you even
mhm.
drink water if you're
Yeah.
fasting?
Oh, you have to
Oh,
drink
okay.
water. Yeah, you have to drink water.
Oh, okay,
So
because you'd get really messed up if you weren't eating or drinking,
yeah, so well, you die. The general rule of thumb
huh?
is you can go about 3 minutes, and again, these are rough numbers, so that's not really true. But the way that I remember it is you can go about 3 minutes without air, you can go about 3 days without water, and you can go about 30 days without food. Again, all of these are just
Wow. Before you
approximate.
completely. Wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy. 30
So
days. That's nuts.
yeah, the skinniest person alive can go about 30 days without eating if you do it
Uh,
right.
a, a
Now,
bigger individual could go a little bit longer because they have a lot of fat and
uh
stored in there. Or...
yes, actually there's like the really like rotund people, like the 400-pound, you know, human beings, like you can go a whole year without actually really eating. It's not good for you. You won't be happy about it,
So I
but
imagine when you get to where you should be weight wise and you start to go below that, that's when it starts to get kind of dangerous. But if you're kind of like a bigger individual, fasting ain't no thing to you, right?
yeah, again, I don't know about their heart conditions, and I don't know about
Oh, that's
certain other things
interesting.
that might be
Oh,
affected
okay.
by this. So again, talk to your
And
doctor,
medications and
do
different stuff, yeah.
research, go look up how to do this right. There are prescriptions on how to do this properly. So don't do anything, without either consulting a
I'm
physician
interested in
or doing
looking
your own
into this and
research.
then
Yeah,
maybe even like talking about what we find to be like some good advice, like how to prepare for it. Like, you know, that'd be a cool
honestly,
thing.
what worked for me really well. So I've tried it a couple different ways. I haven't done it a lot, so don't take this as me being like superior or anything. Like I've done it a couple times, but
No, no, you're good.
I just mean for our audience. Like I'm not trying to be like some high and mighty. I fast all the time and I'm a great Christian. No, I don't do it nearly enough. But the two ways that I've done it is I try to do it where I eat normally the day before, I go to bed, and then I wake up and fast the next day. Because as Americans, we see the day starting with the sun coming up, and so that's how I started fasting originally, and that really doesn't work very well for me. Just the way that my body works, it's really hard for me to go that long without food, and it really like was difficult to do that one day, and you'll find that you get hungry that first day, especially as an American that's eaten literally every single day of your life. You're not used to that feeling, and so you'll get hungry, and it'll suck, but you can tough it out and get through one day pretty easily of what I just described. But what actually worked better for me was fasting from sundown to sundown. And so I would eat all of my normal meals the day before, start fasting at sundown, and then it would be easier for me to make it through the next day. Oh, cuz it was hard for me to fall asleep hungry. The way that I
Oh,
was doing it before, I was falling asleep hungry. So that was difficult for me.
that makes
So,
sense.
just some
Yeah.
things to think about. It is not hard to just stop eating for a day. You don't really need to do a whole lot of planning. I don't believe, again, unless you have medical conditions. You just literally don't do it. Like Austin, knowing you personally and the fact that I don't think you have any crazy medical conditions, I would personally advise you to just not eat. Whenever you feel like you want to try fasting, literally
I've
just do it.
accidentally forgotten to eat like for whole days. Like I've done
Mhm.
that. Like
Yeah.
I'm like,
It's
why
it,
do I have this pounding headache? Yeah.
it's a little different when you decide to do it, because I've had days where I'll forget to eat for a while, but
And
that
it's
and
not a problem, right?
that's not a problem. But when you decide to do it and your body didn't agree to it in advance, that's
It
when.
reminds you constantly. Yeah.
And so I think the part of the reasons for the fast is so that you can focus on God more. The other part of the reason is because we're supposed to deny ourselves, and so that's a way where we can deny one of our body's desires. And so obviously our desire for food is a good thing. We need to eat in order to live, but we have plenty of other desires that our body has: evil sexual desires, evil greedy desires, evil all sorts of other desires. And if we can train ourselves to deny ourselves the desire to eat, right? If we can deny ourselves even though we desire to eat, it's easier to then overcome those other desires that our wicked flesh has. I would, again, this is not I can't point to a scripture that says those words that I just said, but that's
I
that's
mean,
my understanding.
where you come close is where Paul's saying, I constantly bring my body into subjection and discipline. And, like, you know what I mean? You get, that's what I would say.
Hey, apparently you can point to a specific scripture. That's awesome. So, I was just mentioning, like, I know I had read that before and that had been filed away, and that's where I was, but do your own research. Don't just take my word for things, right? Like that's my belief, is that as you deny yourself in one area, it gets easier to deny yourself in other areas. And so we're just supposed to bring our entire body under the subjection of the control of our will, and then we're supposed to subject our will to God's. And so I think fasting fits into that process. And to be honest, I think the fact that we have a lack of fasting in the United States has led to a lot of the issues that we've had, right?
We're impulsive. Yeah.
We're very impulsive. We're very whiny when we don't get things that we want, right? When we don't, like, literally we have whole terms like hangry. Okay, we have people
Yeah.
who can't
Or
control
shirts that
themselves.
talk about "Don't talk to me until I have my coffee" and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. And so, like, let's look at hangry
I've
for a
always had
moment.
my
You know,
coffee.
if you're a person who's fasting, you're going to be able to control yourself better when you're hungry, right? Because you've put yourself into that situation knowingly, and so you can control yourself then. And so when you just get randomly hungry sometime, you can be like, "Oh, that's what it is. I shouldn't be angry right now. I can control myself better." But
Yeah.
we just let ourselves do we're just a society of freedom where we can do whatever we want, and we shouldn't have to control our anger in that situation, right?
There, I know, I don't know if it's just Catholics, but I remember hearing like a Catholic person say like there's two wills that we have. We have like your body's primalistic will, almost like an animal, and then you have like your conscious spiritual will, like the things you want to do for God. And like it's like it's almost like you want to you want to be more in touch with your spiritual desires and fulfill those things and be more in control of your primal desires and you know what I mean? So it's like if you're constantly anytime your body's like jump and you're saying how high, it's going to be really hard when temptation comes as opposed to the guy who's over here fasting all the time and it's like no. I tell you when I'm going to eat. Like do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think that to a certain extent that's right. I wouldn't use those words the words that you just used. I'd use our body's desires and our spirit's desires. I think those would be better words to use to describe that, right? Like my body has wicked desires to overeat and get fat. My body has wicked desires to be gratified sexually. I can have evil and wicked spiritual desires. I can look to other gods other than God. I can pray to things that aren't God, right? Like there's all such sorts of things I can do in those two domains that would be wrong, and it gets easier to subject the other one to you are better in control of each one when you learn how to fast. You're more in control of what your body desires, and then that can also help you be more in control of what your spirit and your heart desires as well, I believe.
yeah, that sounds like pretty like good things. I'm
Yeah,
excited to actually try that.
yeah, and maybe we'll have a day where we kind of coordinate one or something. Now we are supposed to do it in secret to the people that are around us because we're not supposed to go around going, "Oh, I'm so hungry. I'm fasting. I'm such a great Christian." Right? Like that's the last thing you should be doing in your daily life, but it might be something to kind of have fun to do as a group, as, faithful dialogues. We take a day one time to try fasting or something. So,
Yeah, that'd be cool.
something to think about and pray about, of course. So,
Gotta have some like a really big like in and out meal right before that. But like yeah, for sure.
no. In and out is how you end it. So, uh,
Oh
one of the things that I've noticed when I do fast, when you break the fast, that first meal back, oh my gosh, it is delicious. Like it
I
could
can
just be the
imagine. You
normal
taste it
cardboard
so
that you
much.
eat. Yeah. Like it can just be
That
it can just
McDouble just slaps like
no,
extra hard.
seriously, because like you're really tasting all the fats and the salts, and your palate's been cleansed for a whole day. Like there's a lot of reasons why you're primed to just really enjoy that meal when you get back.
Yeah.
And and again, I'm just thinking of this right now at the top of my head, but that's kind of like how we're supposed to feel when we come to Christ, right? Like that's again not 100% perfect picture of it, but it's that sort of thing. We're supposed to, drink his living water, eat the living bread that he has for us, and that's how it's supposed to taste, is what a meal tastes like right after you break a fast. So,
Yeah.
that's something that I've noticed. The crazy fasts where it gets up to like 30 days. So after I think it's like 2 or 3 days, if you don't eat, your body actually like starts shutting down different systems. Okay.
No way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
In a
Tell
in
me
a
about
in
that.
a
That's
good way.
interesting.
I know that sounds bad, but it's actually a good thing. So right now, a lot of the energy that you have that your body is using, instead of going towards your immune system, a lot of the energy is going towards the digestive system, and so
Oh,
your
that's
digestive
interesting.
system is constantly functioning and churning, and that's why you have
So I
stomach
live
acid.
longer if I eat less, is what I'm hearing.
It's look, I'm not making any guarantees. I don't know. Again, I haven't done any studying, but when that system shuts down, you then have more energy. Your body has more energy to put into repairing things. Uh, so so after 3 days, your body starts shutting stuff down, and so then if you've tried to eat something, you actually can die. So if you just start and like if you're fasting for 20 days and you just go to you just go to
Eat a
McDonald's
hamburger.
and grab a McDouble, you're gonna die. That's
Are
how
you serious?
seriously. Yeah. This is
So
so
what do you have to do? Do you have to like eat like really small things to get kind
uh
of back into it?
basically, yeah, I think you start with like soups and stuff, like stuff that's very like basically stuff that's already practically water, and then that kind of like jump starts your system and gets you back into the digestive
You
process.
start drinking milk. I don't know.
I don't I again I don't know what there's a prescription. Again, there's a book. I think it's called God's Fast or God's Predetermined Fast or God's Prescription for Fasting, something like that. Um
I'm blown away that you could come out of a 20-day fast and die just eating normally like that. That's
yeah,
crazy.
like it's
That'd be
I
my temptation. Just
the
slam it. Just go.
yep, but you actually have to like plan this stuff out. You can't just approach a 40-day fast willy nilly. It's a serious deal. So
Was Jesus fasting in the wilderness when he went out to the wilderness?
yeah, he was fasting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's why one of the temptations was to turn rocks
Stone
into
into
bread
bread.
because he
That
was
able
at a
to do
fast. Yeah,
that.
so
All right, let's move on into our next chapter. Let's see. So, the last thing we did was Joseph interpreting the dreams in the prison, and the cupbearer forgot about him. All right, so we're moving on to chapter 41 now. And so Pharaoh has dreams, and Joseph is going to be rising to power in this chapter. And Pharaoh has two troubling dreams that no one can seem to interpret. And the cupbearer remembers Joseph finally. And I think it's like a 2 year period that goes by or something like that. But
uh,
the cupbearer remembers.
yeah.
What's up?
I'm not sure that we actually know the time frame, but it sounds like it was a long time, like multiple years.
Sometime in between, yeah.
Yeah.
The cupbearer remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh about him. Hey, yeah, like, hey, I remember I was when I was in. Oh yeah, he goes, when you were mad at us a couple years ago, and you sentenced us, me and the baker, and then I remember him telling Pharaoh about this
Yep.
because he accounts that, and then yeah, and um so he kind of basically says, yeah, there was a guy in prison that interpreted our dreams and they came true. And so the cupbearer remembers Joseph and tells Pharaoh about him. Joseph is brought before Pharaoh and correctly interprets the dreams. Pharaoh's dreams, just to quickly go through it. So he sees seven like fat cows on along the Nile grazing, and then suddenly that just come out of the Nile, and then suddenly like seven sickly cows come out of the Nile, and the sickly cows consume and eat the healthy cows. And I can't remember the second dream, but it was basically the same. And Joseph tells him, when God gives you like two dreams that are basically the same, it's God saying He's gonna do this. And
Mm-hmm.
so he tells him that that you have these 7 years of prosperity, and it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine, and the famine is going to be so intense you're not even going to remember the good days. It'll be far from your memory. You're just going to remember how bad the famine is. And so basically, he correctly interprets those dreams, revealing that Egypt will experience 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appoints him as the overseer of Egypt. second only to Pharaoh himself to prepare for the
Mm-hmm.
coming famine. And which was crazy is he puts a robe on him and he even gives him his signet ring. If to my knowledge, isn't that the ring that you like punch with the wax and it's like that's my signature and you seal letters with that or something like that? Isn't that what
Yes,
that is?
that's exactly what it is. And so, even just wearing the ring grants you certain rights and privileges. So, if you're just wearing it and you walk up and there's a soldier, he's going to respect you like you're the number two in the country, right?
Yeah, that's insane.
Just for wearing that one specific ring. Okay. And so, in addition to letters and everything else, it means he can literally just walk anywhere. He would even be able to go as an emissary to another country and they would respect that ring like they're talking to Pharaoh almost.
That's crazy.
So like he
And
can it grants him a ton of privileges just having that one ring.
yeah, I thought it was crazy because he could write a letter and sign it, Pharaoh of Egypt. That's like so nuts. Like that Pharaoh liked him so much, or believe, or
Mhm.
like,
Well,
anyway, he just
it
gave him that
it
much trust.
it's a testament to this Pharaoh actually. So what he really saw was that this man Joseph was so in tune with God that he was able to interpret these dreams. And specifically because of the kinds of dreams that they were, where it's predicting this time of great abundance and then a time of great famine, he had the foresight to trust that and to trust God to to hand over his kingdom to essentially God through Joseph and to let him rule
Vicariously.
vicariously and to prepare for these horrible times, right? If it weren't for the dreams, they would have just lived high on the hog for 7 years and then died for
And then
seven
all
years
perished.
and then all
Yeah.
perished. But because of Joseph and because of God and what God did through Joseph, the Pharaoh recognized that and turned over his whole country to him, right? That's an incredible act.
It's
It's on
it's God
par with
showing his love for the world here too, I
mhm.
would say.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a great work that God did, right? Like it wasn't just this Pharaoh that decided to do that, it was because of what God had prescribed for the situation, right? And so God set it
Yeah.
up in such a way that that's what the Pharaoh did and reacted. It's similar to what happened with Jonah and Nineveh, right? So you see that in the story of Jonah, it's a four chapter little book here in the Old Testament. Talks about a man who gets eaten by a whale, and then spit out
A
on
big
the
fish. A
yeah,
big fish.
big fish whale, large sea creature. It could have been a dinosaur for all we know. Um, and gets ultimately spat out on the shore. But what he was doing and why he needed to get eaten by the great fish was because he was running away from what God commanded him to do, and that was to go to the city of Nineveh and preach to them. And the reason he ran away is because he hated them because they were Jew murderers, and I don't blame him, but he was going
He's like,
against
no,
God.
I'm not gonna.
Yeah,
No, they can die.
they can literally. That was his belief is they can rot and die. Uh, so he ends up going to Nineveh, and then immediately he says 40 days and then destruction. That's all he's saying. He's just walking through the street saying 40 days and then destruction. And somehow,
That's
miraculously,
all it took.
the whole city just repents of their sin, and they turn away from their evil and turn towards God, and they're spared for a
They
100
were
years.
ripe. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's funny because there's a lot of people that are in a particular position in their life where you're like the seventh person to preach the gospel, and you're finally what they needed to just all right, you know.
Yep. And
So
yeah.
yeah,
So, it's really cool the way that God works through the whole city in Nineveh, through the Pharaoh's heart here in Egypt, and how he uses that to bring restoration and abundance to people. And that's what God wants to do for everyone. If other cities had turned from their evil and wicked ways towards God, they would have been spared too of a lot of the evil and hardships that they face. And the other thing is, even if you're not spared of the direct evil and hardships, you're given a way that you can handle it, right? You're given, it's not a burden that's too great for you to bear if you have Christ.
yeah, he provides a way out, so to speak, is how the
Hmm.
scripture puts it.
And
I
so,
think Paul said it. I can't
yeah,
remember.
and that's the beautiful thing about the Bible. I've mentioned it before, I believe, on this podcast, where Jordan Peterson showed a picture of all of the different verses that are connected to each other throughout the book. So you'll have Revelation has a verse that calls back to a verse in Genesis. There's a verse in Genesis that's a foreshadowing of what's going to happen in Revelation, and the whole Bible it's one big it's all one thing, It's one database of knowledge that God has given to us from outside of space and time. And so it is completely and perfectly connected together, and because of that we can know that it's a message from God. And it's so beautiful to see the foreshadowing here in Genesis of what's going to happen in Revelation, and to read Revelation having read Genesis and see all the fulfillments of those prophecies and everything that happens throughout the whole Bible. It's just so miraculous.
Yeah, yeah, and when I first became a Christian and I started to like pick up on these interconnected details, and I then realized that this was all happening between a massive stretch of time. I was like, I remember bringing this up to you, and I was just like, there's just no way that like
Mm-hmm.
people concocted this religion. There's just no way. Like, God's intellect is massive, and you were like, you can't convince me a bunch of Jews in like Genesis named their kids in the genealogy because like, yeah, and didn't know or something like that. Like
Yep.
it was really funny.
Yep, the
um
Jewish scribes recording Genesis would not have made up that there were, that genealogy, right? They just wouldn't have done it. Doesn't
yeah.
like, and then for them to do that, how would they know that 4,000 years later or whatever it is that Jesus would come along and, right? Like,
Doing exactly that, yeah.
it just doesn't even make sense. It does. The conspiracy, like, it's hard enough to keep a conspiracy up for 50 years, much less 5,000.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the
uh,
claim. That's the claim that people have legitimately about Christianity, is that it was some like, no, the stuff that we've seen that the archaeology in the Bible is 100% accurate, so they would have had to do 100%, like the legwork required to create the Bible without prophecy, without God's inspiration is just insane. Right? You've had to have known about science, about archaeology, about medicine, about all of these different fields and domains, knowledge that they just didn't even have to our understanding.
yeah, it's crazy because you see like sanitation standards being applied all the way back in like
Mm-hmm.
Exodus,
Yep.
basically. Yeah. And so that at that point in history, um I'm trying to think. At this point, it's just Egypt still, just being the major world power. I don't even think like big Babylon has even hit the scene yet. Like I
Yeah.
think it's still just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Exactly. And so right now, Egypt is in the story, Egypt is the big political entity in the area. There's other people, obviously, that live throughout the whole earth. There's Chinese at this point. There's people living back where Abraham came from in the city of Ur and in the modern day Iraq. Like, right, like those areas are all populated and they have civilizations. But like you said, Babylon hadn't risen to power the way that it was going to yet.
No, because like when you actually try to get into like world history, the farthest back you really get is Mesopotamia, ancient
Hmm.
Mesopotamia, and then out of that you get all of those places, which is like
Yeah.
and Iraq
Hmm.
and like the Fertile Crescent, really. So
And so my belief is actually what the Bible teaches, and that is that this that the first civilization essentially was the Tower of Babel. Okay, so we talked about that.
first city.
Mhm. And so the first, well, that was, and so it's like the first country, really, the first like civilization. That was every human being on the planet was in this one area, and
Do
so
you think like where was that like geographically?
I believe that's
I mean,
Babylon. I believe
oh,
geographically it's roughly where Babylon was.
oh, okay. Because I was
I
gonna
could.
say, what if this is like pre-Egypt?
Mhm. It is. It is pre-Egypt. That's what I'm claiming. This.
Oh,
If you look at Genesis, right? Uh, it goes Noah, then the Tower of Babel, right? And then Abraham. And so the Tower of Babel comes well before Egypt, and that's literally every human on Earth was in this area. This was not like I'm trying. It's hard to describe because we have such a different view of history from our horrible public schools that have indoctrinated us into the ideology of evolution and all of that nonsense. But the every single human being was in this city. Okay, this wasn't like most human beings. It wasn't like almost everybody, no, literally everybody was at the Tower of Babel. They were all working together, and
One
God.
language.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so then that scattered abroad, and so from that one civilization came every other civilization to ever exist. And so the Babel civilization, I won't call it Babylon because that's a later thing, but the Tower of Babel civilization spawned Egypt, ultimately spawned Babylon later on, right? So
Okay.
that's that's my belief on history, is it lines up with what the Bible teaches, not with what Egyptology teaches or whatever other science teaches, because they've all been wrong. And the crazy thing about Egyptology specifically is they lie. So if you look at Egyptologists,
You're just going for the jugular. They
yeah,
lie.
they just straight up lie. They just straight up lie and obfuscate facts to make it so that Egypt was the first civilization. So the
When
uh
they're probably like the inheritors of the first civilization.
well, again, the first civilization I believe was Babel.
Ah, well, yeah,
So
because
well, okay, sorry,
Egypt's
the
not even
first
mentioned. Yeah.
sorry, let me rephrase. That's not even the I'm totally wrong. That's not even the first civilization. That's the first post-flood civilization. So the first civilizations would have existed pre-flood. We just don't have a lineage from those civilizations because it all came through one man
Oh,
in Noah.
okay.
But the first civilizations would have been then. There could have been a billion people on the planet when when the flood came.
I imagine there were. I imagine
So
it was pretty populated, and I imagine technology. What's crazy is I was looking into like some like pyramid stuff and like hieroglyphic stuff, and it
hmm
was like it almost seems like Egypt knew how to make physio electricity with like the pyramid and different stuff. Like they had like these like electrolyte containers that it's like the
yeah.
same concept. Like if you pour a bunch of soda on like a
hmm
watermelon, then stab a charger in
Yep.
it, it'll like charge your cell phone. They like figured this out like a long time ago, and you can only imagine like I'm claiming this. I don't really know.
Yeah.
I'm just
So
regurgitating
well, let me
information, but
let me I actually interestingly enough, I have a little bit different take on this. So the pharaohs and the Egyptians that we see here in Genesis are not the I don't believe are the people that have lived there forever. Okay, so my belief
they stumbled
going
upon it.
forward is that the modern pharaohs stumbled upon these pyramids and started using them as tombs, but I don't believe they're the ones to have built them. My current belief, and again, this
Because they're
isn't
not structured like tombs. They're
no,
they're yeah.
they're these they've
Because
got
they
all
have
these weird
chambers
yeah.
and yeah.
So my again, this isn't anything based on like hard facts. This is just a belief that I have. But my belief is that those were structures that were created before the flood.
Yeah, me too. Because we were talking about that, and like basically the only thing that's going to survive are rocks, and so
Mm-hmm.
this brings into question Stonehenge and
Yeah.
like all the Easter Island
Mm-hmm.
heads and
Well, and there's
Göbekli Tepe and like different things. If you
well,
know
and
about that,
there's
that's like a
yep.
yeah. Good.
Well, there's hundreds and thousands of pyramids and temples in South America that we haven't even uncovered. So
That is yeah, because they're all
yeah.
what like satellite covered by canopies of like jungle and stuff like that, or
Well, and the crazy thing was what happened was Westerners, the Spanish landed in the Americas, and the diseases that they brought ended up wiping out those civilizations. So
the
there were
indigenous people. Oh wow.
yeah, there were hundreds, if not like 1,000 different like temple city things that all had tens of thousands of people in them, and we see them all abandoned within like 100 years. And then 100 years after that, they're covered by the jungle so thick that you could walk up to there could literally be a pyramid right here, and you're looking at it, and it just looks like jungle. Okay, there's a pyramid that
It's
starts.
moss
Yes,
overgrown and
it's
like
it's
yeah,
so
yeah.
crazy. Like the biggest, it's actually the biggest pyramid in the world is in Mexico, and we didn't know it because it was so covered up. We thought it was a mountain. The Catholics came upon it after it had been abandoned, and they thought it was a mountain, and they built a church on top of the pyramid, not knowing it was a pyramid. so like, so that and that was literally like 100 or 200 years after it had been abandoned, probably because the jungle just grows over it so quickly. So
That's really fascinating. Wow.
I think that there's a lot of things that we attribute to ancient, like, post flood humans, because the
That
science
were
doesn't.
actually existing before.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And that's mainly because science doesn't acknowledge that there was a flood, even though there's just such crazy and ample evidence for
Even
it.
if
But
what's crazy is like a lot of like cultures have like a flood type event in their history. So it's like I
basically
don't know.
everyone, like, it's
Yeah.
not
So if
even
you're
a
gonna
lot. It's
ignore,
like the it would be shorter to list the cultures that don't have a flood myth than the ones that do. Like, it's like there's two or three, and them, even the ones that don't technically have a flood myth probably have like some kind of a disaster myth, you know, but they're like a desert people that don't know what a ocean is or something, you know.
oh
Like,
yeah,
that's my guess as to the cultures that don't have a flood myth, is they've lived in the desert so long that they forgot how to communicate what an ocean is, and floods don't make sense, so they
because they're in this
trans
vast expanse of dry land. It's hard to think of a vast expanse of
yeah.
wet.
Exactly. So there might be cultures that don't have a flood myth, but they probably have some kind of crazy cataclysmic event in their mythology. And so ultimately, I believe that that's what all religion is it's a corruption of the original religion that God gave to Adam and Eve. And so they've just, because of the fact that we don't live in the pre-flood world anymore, a lot of those mythologies start morphing and changing over time and get corrupted until you're basically worshiping a demon. Right? Like,
Yeah,
that's kind of what happens, I believe. So we're right up
yeah.
at 2 hours. Have we kind of finished up with chapter 41, or was there anything else in chapter 41 that you wanted to go
Just my
over?
question.
Sorry, what
You
was your
kind
question?
you basically nailed it. My question was, it seems like Pharaoh understands that if someone can interpret dreams, they must have God with them.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say? Would you say that Pharaoh had a small faith in the Lord? Because it seems clear that this Pharaoh seemed to deal kindly with Joseph and his people, like, sorry, dealt kindly with Joseph and his people, and was blessed while placing Joseph in command of his country. So it
Mm-hmm.
almost seemed like Egypt prospered because of the decision that Pharaoh made to put Joseph, like so it like if go ahead. Go ahead. What's your
Yeah.
take on that?
So definitely, Pharaoh absolutely had to have some kind of faith in God based on his actions. So he knew that Joseph was claiming that he wasn't doing the interpretation and that God was doing it. And ultimately what he did is he entrusted his country to a man who has direct access to God's, will and to God's thoughts. And we all should be so lucky as to put, our country into the hands of somebody that has a direct line of communication with God, right? So I completely agree that this Pharaoh definitely did have some amount of a faith in God, and in definitely had a faith in Joseph, right? And because of that, because he handed his country over to Joseph, he was able to be saved, which is also what we're again, to loop it back to what I said at the beginning of the episode. This is a foreshadowing of what Jesus Christ is going to do. Okay, and because we give our world or our country over to Jesus Christ, ultimately we're going to have 1,000 years of prosperity. And so when you give your country over, when you're Egypt and you give your country over to Joseph, you get through the famine, and you use the 7 years of good abundance to store up for the bad. When Jesus Christ comes and he takes over, you're getting 1,000 years of pure awesomeness, right? Like, but you can see kind of how it's foreshadowing. It's,
Yeah.
again, not the same thing, but Joseph saves Egypt. Jesus is going to save the world and provide it with just an abundance we couldn't ever possibly imagine.
Yeah. And so I think next week we'll pick up with the exchange with his brothers, and then we could probably move on to something else.
Awesome. Yeah, so we'll finish up with the story of Joseph next week. I love it so much. This is such a great story. I highly recommend everybody go read it. And if you have any questions about it, you read this story and you have some questions specifically about it, try to get those into us before next week, either in the comments of wherever it is that you're watching, or if you want to email me, faithfuldialogues@gmail.com.
Yeah, and then also I'm gonna keep mentioning this. Comment a question in one of our videos to basically just enter the raffle for the free shirt giveaway. Yeah, just ask any question that's wholehearted and respectful, and we'll answer it, and you will be entered into our t-shirt giveaway.
Perfect. Also, if you have any prayer requests that you would like us to pray for you about, or you just want everybody here that's watching and listening to pray about for you, let us know as well. I understand that sometimes that's a little bit too personal, but we also want to be there for our community. If there's somebody that needs to reach out and feel like they're being heard, or feel like that they're special, we all feel that way sometimes. So reach out to us.
Yeah.
We care about you guys and want to see you be prosperous Christians, right? That's the goal.
Yeah, put your faith in Jesus. Guarantee yourself eternal life.
Amen. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Austin, for joining me again this week. For I guess not joining me, for coming and doing Faithful Dialogues. It's a lot of fun doing this with you. I've been wanting to do a podcast for a while, so it's been a great privilege so far, and I'm excited to see where this goes.
Yeah, me too. All right. And Ryan, where can we find your stuff?
So you can find my stuff at aiiw.org, as it is written is the name of the organization, and yeah, do some cool stuff over there. I'm gonna restart my political podcast that I was doing, coming up next week. I haven't nailed down exactly what days I'll be doing it, but check that out over at aiiw.org. I like to do news combined and politics combined with Christianity. And just a little context: I do have a degree in political science, and so I just want to kind of spread that awareness and spread the word of Christ through the news.
All right. And you can find me here on Faithful Dialogues, and then the shirts that we'll be giving away, the Christ-centered clothing line is called Apostles Attic, and you can find me down there at apostlesaddict.com.
Wonderful. Have a great week, everybody.
All right.
Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.